Hey guys, this is P here and I'm going to be showing you today how to make a fleece hand and rod puppet. This video is for those of you in my Year 8 class who are maybe having a bit of trouble putting your puppet together, or maybe doing some work at home and you're not really too sure what the next step is. So I'm going to be showing you our entire project from start to finish on how we construct our puppet.
So what you're going to need for this project is 8 domestic sponges, some fleece, polar fleece is fine, or otherwise a recycled jumper or something similar. You're going to need some cotton, a needle and thread, maybe some pins, and then you'll also need some skewers. First thing you're going to do though is to take your pattern piece for the foam. You're going to cut those out, and then the next thing that you're going to do is then trace those out onto the foam pieces like so, and then cut them out. And so you should have 8 triangle shapes, 2 full sponges, 4 pieces for the arms, and then 2 hand pieces. So you're going to take those 2 hand pieces and 4 sponges and you're going to put them aside for now because we're going to use them later. We're going to focus on those 8 sort of triangular pieces. What you're going to need is 5 of those for the head or the actual skull part, and 3 for the jaw. First thing we're going to do is actually sew these together. They're going to form the jaw and the skull portion. You're going to need about 50 centimeters worth of cotton. And then what you'll do is you'll grab your sewing needle and then thread that through the eye there. Once you do get that through the eye of the needle, you're going to let that drop down towards the middle and double up that thread and just tie a simple knot with both of those pieces of thread ends together, just like so. And then from there we're going to then pick up 2 of our triangular pieces. In this case I'm going to do the jaw first. I'm going to bring those points at the very top together. I'm going to put the needle through one side, like in this case the pink sponge, and then out through the green sponge, connecting them together. You don't want to pull too tight or else you can tear the sponge, and you also want to make sure that that knot doesn't come right the way through. It can get a bit tangled, which is okay. And then we're just going to be doing a really simple stitch where we go in one side and out the other and then come across the top. So you will see the thread, and that's okay. But basically the idea is to put the needle through one colour and out through the other in this case, or through one sponge and then out through the other. And then we're going to make our way right down to the bottom and make a seam. So once you do get down to the very bottom here, what you're going to do is actually try and put that needle through the same spot that you did previously. You are then going to take that and not pull it necessarily right the way through, just like so. And then you're going to see like this little loop here. You're going to put your needle through once, and then you're going to put that needle through again twice, and you're going to pull that very gently and it's going to form itself a knot. From here you'll take your scissors and cut it, quite close to that knot that you've just done, and then you'll get some more thread because you'll probably find that you won't have quite enough to do the whole next side. Cut it off and then continue on like you would the first bit that we've just done. So in this case I'm just threading through that needle again, through that eye. Sometimes it could be a bit tricky depending on your side of your needle, and then we'll keep on going. So here you can see there's a completed jaw, and then once you've done those 3 pieces together, we'll then grab the next 5 and do the same. Here's our skull portion here where we've joined 5 of them together. We're just going to make that last final join. In this case I'm actually going to start down like the bottom rather than the top points, and this way it just sort of helps form that round shape we want for that half skull. Same as all our sewing, we start off in the same manner by putting the needle through a few times and then working our way in and out. We do want to make sure that we do push that needle away from us, that way we're less inclined to stab ourselves in the fingers. Here now you can see that I've moved to the very top of the skull, just joining all of those points together. You might find that you go across a few of the different ones there just to really close that gap that you might have at the top, and then the same process that you do with all our other stitching, we create that sort of little loop put our needle through a couple of times through it, like so, and then pull tightly, and then grab our scissors, chop off that thread, and as you can see we have this sort of half sphere skull portion. What we're going to move on to now is also our body parts, but you might find that if you're doing this project over a couple of days, your sponges might be starting to dry out, so you can give them a quick spray with a spray bottle. For our body, we are actually going to join them together along the shorter sides. Same process again, we're going to go through one side and out the other using exactly the same stitches. This whole project uses exactly the same stitches. The only difference will be with the width or how close we put them together. With our sponge portions, we're going to go right the way along that narrow side and then the same on that far side there. Now you can see that our body portion is done. It's like a tube, so make sure that your hand can fit through there. Most people should have no problem there. And now we're actually going to move on to the fleece pieces. So we have our pattern pieces here, and I have my recycled fleece jumper. That's what I'm going to be using for the body. I'm going to cut those pattern pieces out, and then I'm going to put them onto my fleece. Make sure that with the fleece that you are not tracing onto the fluffy side, you are tracing onto the smooth side. If you've got polar fleece, it doesn't really matter, but if you do have a smooth side and a fluffy side, it's the fluffy part that you want on the outside. So we're going to put those pattern pieces on there, we're going to trace them out, and then we're going to cut them out. And as you can see, these are all of our pieces there. We're going to take these head pieces, the jaw pieces and the back of the head. We're going to put aside our arm pieces and our hands and body for now because we're going to be working on them later. First bit we're going to be looking at is the head piece. As you can see, I've actually written the letters on my fleece. It makes it a lot easier, and we're going to just be joining the F sides together. So as you can see, it's that familiar triangle shape. We're going to go along that one side from the point down to where it joins together, and then we're also going to go the same on the other side to mirror it, going from that point down to that side. So like all of our other stitching on the sponges or our foam, we're going to start off. I find it easier to start at the points there. We're going to pull that through, and we start off exactly the same way that we did with our sponge pieces. Again, going through that point, the same spot again. But this time what we want to make sure is that when we're bringing our needle, we want to go a bit narrower compared to our sponge pieces, probably only a few millimeters between each of our stitches, just so that it's nice and tight, and then we're less likely to see them when we turn it inside out. So we're going to go right the way down to that point where they join together. As you can see, I've done one side of it. Now I'm going to mirror it by just folding that in. Now, depending on your personal preference, you might find it easy to start, at that point and work your way all the way down to where that join is. And that's what I'm going to do here. I just find that easier myself. And so we'll join them together at that point, starting off exactly the same way every single time. Making sure that we're only a few millimeters between each of our stitches. So here we have that completed head section there, and what you want to do now is actually to test to make sure that it fits nice and firmly over your sponge skull portion. You can match up the seams of your fleece to the seams on your sponges, and you want to make sure that it is a nice firm fit and that you've got a couple of centimeters overlap on the edges. That's because that's going to actually be glued down to your mouthpiece when we get to that point. We now got the jaw piece, which looks very much the same as that front skull portion, but this time we're going to sew along the letter E sections using exactly the same stitches and exactly the same format. So we've got them both together here, and now we're going to go to the back of the skull, and this portion also does the back of the head and the neck. So as you can see here, we're going to join them together. We've got an A side there, and you can sew that from that very top point right the way down to where the fabric joins. As you can see, exactly the same fashion. And then you're going to check as well that that's going to sit nicely in that back section. You'll then also have that front portion, and we're going to be joining those two together now. So you want to find that point and bring that center triangle of that front skull bit to meet the center of that, and then you'll notice that there's this B sides on the two outside edges of the front skull which meet up with the back portion. You want to make sure there's 1 centimeter excess on each side, because we want to allow for that to fold over to our front portion to meet up with our mouthpiece. So what I find that's easy to do is to start on one side, making sure I leave that 1 centimeter excess there, place my needle in, and then you'll work your way around that semicircle from one side right the way across to the other. As you can see here, I've gotten to the edge of the other side of that semicircle, and I'm going to be just finishing this off, leaving that 1 centimeter excess. So make sure that we do have that on the other side as well. I'm going to now finish off my stitching using that same process that I've had done previously by making that small loop, feeding through my needle through a couple of times, and then pulling into a knot. We can now take our scissors and cut that off, and you'll kind of see how this is making almost like a Legionnaire's cap. So we can fit that on, and you'll see just how that whole top skull portion is now fitting really quite well. And so our next task is going to actually be to do the jaw. Now that's going to be almost like a mirror image to that front skull section, but we are going to then be joining it on those far edges to that back section. So this bit's actually quite tricky because they're very curved. We have a curve in one direction here, and then curve going to the other. So you're going to find that center point, and that's going to be starting right where that curve ends down the bottom, and then we're going to be sewing right away around that edge, and again leaving that 1 centimeter flap towards where that mouthpiece is going to go, which will end up being glued upon. So for me, I find it easier to maybe use some pins for this, and to make sure that I'm leaving my 1 centimeter allowance. I'm going to go through here on that very edge where that curve stops and where the point of that bottom jaw bit starts, and again start off my stitches the same as I normally would. So you will have to sort of check every so often to make sure that you are going through both pieces of the fleece, using those short stitches a few millimeters at a time. I've gotten to my point where I know that that is where my 1 centimeter allowance is. I'm just going to finish off here, again putting my needle through that loop a couple of times and pulling tight. Now for this video I've actually used a white cotton thread so that you can actually see this a little bit better, but normally what you would want to use is a thread that's very similar to the colour of your fleece. This time I'm now going to go and do the other side, again using that center point where that curve stops down the bottom, and then moving my way up to meet up that skull part along that C side, leaving that 1 centimeter gap, coming along those edges. Now this time I'm probably actually going to start towards the mouth section rather than down at the base of the jaw, just because then that way we can continue on down to that neck portion there. So as you can see, I'm moving my way down along this side, again using some pins to help me out to hold it all together, working my way down. And now I'm getting towards the end, at the very base of the jaw. Both of those curves are now come together. So if I actually pick my fleece up, you'll actually see where the mouth is. You'll see where the jaw is. So if I put it on its side here, you'll kind of see like a profile of a head and jaw. But now we're actually going to do that last little portion of the neck. There's like two little sections that need to be sewn together. So rather than finishing off, I'm actually just going to continue on, and to make sure that I have my needle pushing away from me, coming right the way down that neck to finish off the head portion of the puppet. Okay, so I've now finished the head portion of the fleece. You can see very much now it's looking a lot like a head. What I'm going to do now is actually turn this right side out, so we have that real fluffy fleece on the outside. I'm now going to insert my top part of the skull just to see what that's like, making sure that it is a nice fit and that I do have that, you know, overlap. And then I'll insert my jaw portion as well, just to make sure that it all fits nice and snugly. You don't want to have the fleece too loose, or else your puppet's going to look a little bit deformed, like its skin's peeling off almost. But just put those skull and jaw portions in of your sponge, and then you'll see by putting your hand through, it is starting to look a bit like the head of a puppet. So now what we're going to do is now put that aside, and we're going to start by doing our body portion. So we're going to flip it so it's right sides together, like so. And then where we're going to sew is we're going to go along the side seams on both sides. And then we're going to just do little portions of the top just to where the neck width is on those sides. So as you can see now, through the magic of editing, I have sewn those two sides and those two portions there. What I'm going to do now is actually turn this upside down and then push this over the top of my head and jaw portion. And then I'm going to try and make sure that center seam is very much in the center middle portion of that torso. And then we're going to now sew around the edges of that so that the neck portion as well as our body portion all comes together. So here I am just finishing off doing that. Here I've gone right around the edges, just finishing off through putting that needle through those sections. And as you can see, it all comes together, looks a little bit like a sack there. And now I'm going to actually pull that out and push those little sections at the top out to make the shoulders for the puppet. And as you can see, that's what will now make the body portion. Make sure that your arm, you know, does fit through there. If you follow the pattern and cut out your pieces accurately, you should have no problem at all. And now it's starting to look like a puppet. So now we're going to move on to the hand and arm portions. What we're going to do with these arm pieces is put the right side in towards the middle and then fold them over. And then we're going to sew along the long sides on each side. And then with our hands, we're going to put the right sides together. So that real like flat part of the fleece is on the outside. Putting both hands together. And then we're going to sew around the very edges, leaving a hole down the very bottom along that straight edge. So as you can see here, I've sewn around those edges and then I've sewn around those arm portions. Now I'm going to get the sponge pieces. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually turn my hands inside out. This can be pretty tricky because the whole of the wrist area is quite small. So just try and push your thumb through or fingers if you can. You might find you'll need like a texter or a pen to like push the finger portions out, just so you really get that hand looking shape. And like all animated characters, as you can see, our puppet only has 4 fingers. And now we're going to actually grab our sponge hand pieces and then roll them up in like a tube shape and then push them through into that hand. Again, these parts can actually be, you know, quite tricky and quite time consuming, but be patient. You don't want to push too hard or else you might risk, you know, undoing those stitches around the edges. Just, you know, wiggle them a bit. Again, you might need to use your pen or texter to try and help flatten out or push those fingers in. As you can see, there's our little hand. And then we're going to do the same thing with the arms. So we're going to take 2 sponges in this case, or those 2 rectangular pieces, and we're going to put them in there. So you're going to start off by, again, unrolling and pushing through so that the fluffy side of your fleece is on the outside. And this one can also be quite tricky because it is, you know, a long tubular shape. So be patient. It is a bit fiddly, and then eventually you will turn it completely the other way around. And again, you're going to put these, try and sort of roll it into like a little bit of a more narrower shape as you push through. You may find it beneficial to like press it or roll it, sort of a bit like socks, maybe over the top of the sponge, but this is probably one of the most difficult portions to do. So now that you've got your sponges inside the hands and inside your arms, we're going to attach the arms to the hands. So at that wrist portion, we're going to put the thread through. Remember not to pull too tight, just like I did then, because that knot will come through. We're just going to stop there, and then we're going to then go to your hand at that wrist section, and then you're just going to use that same kind of stitching of in one side and out the other to attach the wrist right the way around. Now you might see the threads here. That doesn't really matter because most people will be paying attention to the movement of the arms on the puppet and not really be paying attention too much to the stitches. Over time, if you've made a few puppets, you might want to try yourself at a Henson stitch, which is a type of stitching that makes it almost invisible when it comes to your thread. And again, if you're using a thread colour that is very similar to the colour of your fleece, that will also tend to allow it to blend into the background. So as you can see here, both hands have been attached at the wrist area, and now we're just going to actually sew together at the very end the fleece just to make a complete arm section. This just helps reinforce those arms at the joints, so when we do attach it to the body. I'm just going to go and do my same stitches like I've been doing through this whole project. Just trying to fold that fleece so it's a bit neater. But if your puppet's going to be wearing clothing or a costume, then it won't matter too much. So in this case, I've finished that arm, and I'm going to now attach it to my body so that you can have 2 places. You can do it sort of onto the side there, or you may choose to do it on top of the shoulder. That gives it a bit more of a curvature of the shoulder area. But I think today for this puppet I'm going to be using just that side portion there, and I'm just going to attach them together the same way I did with those arms to the wrists. And now you can see here they're joined. Now what I'm doing at the moment is I'm taking the very end of the needle and then trying to actually pull some of the fleece between the stitches. If you've got a polar fleece, you know, this works really effectively. My fleece here is quite a short pile, and so by doing that, it's just pulling that fleece out and covering some of those stitches a bit more. Again, if you've got the thread the same colour, then you won't see it as much. And now really we've finished with our stitching. So now we're coming to the fun part of our puppet construction, which is the facial features. I've now inserted my foam body and my skull and jaw. I find that it's just a little bit easier to do the facial features by having that foam in there. What you'll need for this is you're going to need some plastic spoons, some fleece, you might have some spare fur for some hair that you might want to add to your puppet. You can also use wool for hair. I've got some pom-poms here which I can use as noses again. Those plastic spoons we're going to use for eyes. You could also use some leftover fleece to make things like ears for your puppet, or potentially a nose, depending on, you know, what kind of character you want your puppet to be. You also need a glue gun to help put these on. I'm going to start off by doing the eyes, so I'm going to grab 2 spoons. Now spoons can be quite tricky to work with, but as you can see they're really good for that natural sort of almond eye shape. In order to make the eyes though, we're going to have to cut the handle part of the spoon. Now plastic spoons of different kinds can be a bit tricky. If you press too hard like this, you'll find that they break. You might find it best to sort of like rub them to warm them up to make them a bit more malleable, and just, you know, really kind of cut very slowly to try and get that off without breaking the main part of the spoon. And then once you do that, then you can just sort of get rid of those jagged edges a bit and make it a bit more round. So as you can see, that's going to be one of my eyes for this puppet. Now if you've got like a female character you want to make, you might want to get some coloured felt to make like the eyeshadow effect. That's like what's used in a lot of the Muppets, but I'm going to go for a bit more of a natural looking eye. So I'm going to take some scrap fleece, I'm going to take my marker and then trace that eye shape on half. Okay, and on that half from there, I'm now going to just take my scissors, cut it directly across from one point to the other, and then cut that rounded shape of the eye. Now once I've done that, I'm going to now attach that sort of skin or fleece to that eye to make it just look like it's got some natural eyelids. Now I find that attaching to the plastic spoons, the best thing is glue tape. Now you could try putting it on the fleece itself, but it doesn't tend to stick overly well, so you'll want to try and actually put the glue itself onto the plastic eye. I'm having a bit of trouble here because of the glue coming off onto the fleece itself. So you want to like roll that a couple of times just to make sure that you've got a good amount of glue there. Alternately, you can use the hot glue gun to put that onto the plastic spoon, but I like the glue tape because that way you don't have to burn yourself. And so there, I'm just going to stick it on. As you can see, it sticks on quite well just with that glue tape there. If you've got some like felt marker around there that you can see a bit too much, then just grab your scissors and cut around that so the eye lid sits there nicely. So as you can see, now it has a bit more of a natural feel. Of course, if you want to go without the eyelid, that's fine. And in this case, I'm going to be using my marker. You can use black felt and add it on top yet again for these features, but I find the fabric marker works just as well. So I'm just going to colour in just on the very edge of the eye so there's a bit of definition from a distance. And then I'm just going to put that straight onto the plastic there and make that round pupil. From there, what you'll do is get the hot glue gun and then glue that onto the puppet at a good sort of spot that you're happy with. I like the front seams. That's really good. It helps, you know, give you sort of even balance. You may find that when you do put it, it might be a bit too hollow. So if you want to fill it with some fleece, attach that spare fleece to the eye and then the fleece to the main portion, you might find that a bit easier. The other thing that you'll want to attach to your face is your nose. So you may choose to use some spare fleece to create more natural looking nose, okay, like so. Or you may decide that you want something that's a bit bigger or a bit smaller, playing around with those sizes. You might want something that's a bit more contrasting, so you might grab a different coloured fleece or some felt here. You can have different shapes, different sizes. And the other option is to use something like little pom-poms here. So I'm going to use one of those today. I'm not really too sure at this stage what I want, so there's a black one there, or you might want a contrasting colour like a red one, so I'm going to leave them out and then see what I feel like. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the mouthpiece. I've finished like my facial features for now. You'll want to grab that pattern. You're going to need red, black and pink felt. You're going to need that cool glue tape, or again you can use the hot glue gun. So first thing you're going to do is start by cutting out those pattern pieces. When it comes to that round circular bit, you are going to need a bit of cardboard. So cereal box is a really good cardboard to use for that base part of the mouthpiece. I've got one here, so from a Nutrigain one. I've already pre-cut that one out. And then because I've already done that, I don't need to cut it out my pattern here, but you will. And I'm just going to place that on my red felt. That's going to be the biggest portion that you'll need. I'm going to then trace that onto my felt. I'm going to cut that out. And then I'm just going to use that glue tape to glue it onto that cardboard and then cut out those pieces and cut those out too. So here you can see I've already glued my felt pieces onto the piece. I'm just going to do those extra features now. So you've got your center part like so, and then your tongue. What you'll want to do with this though is that glue tape there is not going to work on the felt bit like with the fleece, so you will have to use the hot glue gun. Now the good thing about felt is it tends to stick to itself quite well without any glue, but just for permanency you'll want to have that adhesive. So you won't need an awful lot of hot glue, just a really small drizzle. My glue gun at the moment is not working too great, so that's why I've got a little bit more than normal. And then what you want to do is make sure that that black section goes right in that middle portion. So very much make sure halfway is on that crease. And then with my tongue portion, I'm going to bring that slightly further more towards the edge. So it goes about halfway along that black portion, just like so. And so as you can see, that looks like an internal part of the mouth. Now we're going to actually do the bit that holds our fingers to it. I've just got some gaffer tape here that I've doubled up that goes for the width of my hand, or a little bit longer, but masking tape's fine. And then we're going to attach that to the top part of that mouthpiece like so, making sure there's room for your hands to go through. And all I'm going to do to attach this is actually use some gaffer tape. Now another thing that you could do is to staple it to the mouthpiece before you put your felt on, but I find that the gaffer tape works just as equally as well. I'm going to make sure that I do one side first, and then on the other side making sure that there is that gap section for your hands. If you do it just straight across, you're not going to have room for your fingers to fit through. So there we go, I've put that on there, and then any excess that's sticking out, you just take your scissors and cut around that circular portion, just like so. And there is our mouthpiece. Put your hand, make sure that it fits through, have a go like lifting it up and down, and then pressing down on those side pieces of the gaffer tape to make sure that it stays. Now what we will do is the very last part of the main head portion of our puppet is that we're going to place that mouthpiece now inside. So once this is in, it's very difficult to modify the sponge, so you've got to make sure that this is one of the last things that you do. So we're going to insert that mouthpiece in there and then overlap that fleece edge. So you'll see if you just have it sitting upright, it's going to be quite difficult. So you'll want to flip your puppet around, a bit like you're at the dentist's office and you're the dentist. And we're going to get that hot glue and glue it around the very edges of the mouthpiece. As you can see, my glue gun is not working too good. If something looks like that, make sure you get an adult to help you out. I'm going to pull that excess fleece up and over, and then I'm going to start slowly putting little bits of hot glue along the very edge of that mouthpiece. You don't want to have too much because otherwise you'll be able to see it, not so much from a distance but up close. You will try, maybe if you can, to get like a small nozzled glue gun like this one here. The fat ones tend to have a bit too much flow, but if you're like really gentle and careful, it shouldn't make overly too much difference. So now I've hot glued there. Do remember that it is hot glue, so it can burn your fingers, so you might want to wait a little bit. And now I'm just going to pull that excess fleece that we have left in that seam allowance over the top of that mouthpiece onto that hot glue, pushing down very gently. As you can see, it is hot, so be very careful. You may want to wait, 10 or so seconds after putting it on before trying to press down to prevent yourself from burning. Remembering that if you do burn your fingers, the best thing to do is to run it under cold water for a while. And just making that fit. And so now I'm going to do the jaw part. I've done the skull part, and again just putting those little amounts of glue around the very edges of that mouthpiece. And this is why it's important to make sure that you do leave that seam allowance and that your puppet fleece for its skin is quite fitting, because if it's too excessive, your fleece won't fit around that mouthpiece, and if it's too tight, then you won't have the mouthpiece fitting in there properly. So again, it's really important to follow all the patterns. And there we are. We've put it together, just using our fingers to press down, making sure that it's there. Now we can even put our hand inside our puppet into that mouthpiece mechanism and then pushing down with our hands and fingers to make sure that it's really firmly in there and not going to come out anytime soon. And as you can see, most of our puppet is now finished. We only have our rods for our hands to go. So with our rods, we're doing a very low budget version in that we're going to be using those bamboo barbecue skewers. What you're going to do is take the pointy end and then find a gap in the stitching at the wrist there and just push it through. You don't want to go too far where it pokes out the other side, but as you can see, we go through that. And then we're going to do the same to the other side. And then once they're in there, it's basically our hand and rod puppet done. So don't forget that you can pause this video at any point in time and go back and look at the steps, and hopefully by the end of the project your puppet looks something similar to this one. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope that was helping you along in the construction of your hand and rod puppet, and I look forward to seeing the work that you get done when you bring it back to class.